In the fall of 1987, local news channel WSB-TV2 of Atlanta, Georgia, was attempting to fill a scheduling gap in their Sunday morning lineup. After a few solicitations by local business owners, they decided to allow the young Reverend Marley Sachs to take the available hour block to do a religiously themed show. It premiered October 18th with little promotion. The show was standard religious fare and consisted of the Reverend sitting in a simple chair reading passages from the Bible to the camera and discussing their interpretation and significance to our modern day-to-day life. The show received a reasonable number of viewers and continued to be shown into early December. It was then that the studio began to receive extremely strange complaints from viewers of Words of Light with the Reverend Marley Sachs. The calls were from women, and women only, who vaguely referred to uncomfortable feelings they had at very specific intervals during the program. They described feelings of nausea, back pain, dizziness, and blurred vision. These callers, for no discernible reasons, were convinced that it was the viewing of the program that was causing these symptoms. It was later determined after 3 weeks of complaints that these feelings were happening at roughly 12-minute intervals during the course of the program. The small studio staff checked all recording equipment, both audio and video, and found nothing faulty. When the Reverend was made aware of these incidents, he merely shrugged and stated cryptically that some can't handle the voice of God. The head of the studio, at a loss to explain the cause of these complaints, decided to continue running the program. By February, viewership had dropped sharply, and it was decided to pull the plug on the show. The studio had figured it would be more prudent to spend as much time as possible on the news story that had the other two local news networks abuzz, the miscarriage epidemic, starting somewhere in November. The number of healthy pregnant women miscarrying in Atlanta's metropolitan area had reached over 300, and the CDC could not find a discernible cause for this terrifying occurrence. The Reverends took the show's cancellation with what could only be described as abject indifference. When informed, he didn't protest, merely nodded, almost knowingly. He left the studio after the last episode was filmed, without so much as a word, and dropped off the face of the earth. No one had ever heard from him again, not his former congregation or any member of the church. The studio moved on, filling the slot with an infomercial, and continued to concentrate on the miscarriage story. A year and a half later, an intern at the WSB studios discovered the tapes of the Words of Light and began going through them in an attempt to find stock footage of an upcoming piece of that the station was doing on the impact religion had on the city. The Atlanta incident, as the miscarriage epidemic became known in medical journals, petered out 3 months after the studio canceled. Reverend Sachs' show had already began to fade from public consciousness. As the intern went through the tapes, he accidentally made a disturbing discovery about the footage. While attempting to stop one recording at 10 minutes and 45 seconds, he mistakenly jammed the fast-forward button. While the footage whizzed by, he attempted to pry up the button with a screwdriver. Just as he succeeded, the tape stopped at 32 minutes and 1 second. The intern actually fell out of his chair when he looked up at what was frozen on the screen. The image of a badly decomposed, severed head filled up the entire frame. After he collected himself, he moved the film back a few frames, then forward, and realized that his mind was not playing tricks on him. He began going through the rest of the recordings and soon discovered that at exactly 12-minute intervals, the image would appear for 1 frame. Thinking it was a practical joke being played on the new guy, he presented it to one of the film technicians, ready to be mocked. The technicians were just as puzzled as him. No one had touched the footage since the cancellation of the show. After the studio had closed for the night, the intern convinced the tech to help him go look through these tapes of the Words of Light. They discovered that every single episode had the same horrifying anomaly. They also realized that as the show progressed, the images had become more disgusting. As maggots began to eat away at the loose flesh and pieces of hair and skin seemed to have fallen off exponentially, the tech made clear to the intern that what they were seeing was technically impossible, since the film itself showed absolutely no signs of splicing. And he himself had been at every filming of the show and knew of no time when this image could have been inserted into that frame. All of this was presented at the studio head, who, fearing some kind of backlash over allowing this to get on air, ordered all the tapes to be destroyed. He told the intern and tech that he had no interest in knowing who did it at this point, knowing that covering their collective asses is all that's important now. He demanded that they mention this to no one. The tech easily moved on, remembering the incident as a darkly funny personal anecdote, but the intern wouldn't let it go. He made copies of as many tapes as he could before they were wiped. He took them to see if he could find anything else in them that might point out to who did this or why they would. A week later, he attempted to rope the tech into helping him again, saying that he believed he had discovered something even more disturbing than the images themselves. See, when the single frames were edited together in chronological order, the head's mouth appeared to be moving, as if trying to form words. The tech, fearing for his job, told him to get rid of the copies and not to talk about it again. A week later, police responded to a 911 call made by an elderly woman to one of Atlanta's suburbs at dusk. She had heard horrible noises coming from her next-door neighbor's house where a young couple lived. She told the emergency responder that the wife was pregnant and that she was terrified that something had happened. When the officers arrived on the scene 20 minutes later, they found no lights on, and the windows and the front door ajar. They moved in slowly and made their way into the living room. Inside they found a young woman, dead, with her abdomen sliced, completely open. There was a trail of blood that led from the body to the couch on the far end of the room. There sat her husband, the studio intern, naked, the corpse of his unborn child at his feet dying. In his hand he held the rusty piece of metal sliding he had used to gut his pregnant wife. The television was on and playing an 18-second loop of silent footage of a decomposing head mouthing some unintelligible words. The story at the police precinct to this day goes that the intern kept saying under his breath, over and over again, as they led him away, "The light of God calls them." Well, that was a nice departure from video games, returning to the land of lost episodes. TV in particular, this one, was, while cliched, still interesting to read through. For one, I will say what makes this quite pleasant is the fact that it is, in a way, realistic. Now, don't get me wrong, the part with the video combined at the end leading to the early termination of kids was pretty fucking stupid, but the idea that at some local television station where, again, remember, this isn't on a national level, and while still under close scrutiny, remember, mistakes do tend to happen anywhere. Slip-ups constantly occur no matter what field you work in. And in this environment, I'll tell you that people do make a lot of slip-ups if they're not focusing, if they're not looking at something. And again, local TV is an environment where people begin their careers. And when the time comes, they obviously branch off to bigger and better productions. So for them to air a show, you have to remember that a majority of people that work on this stuff may be entry level. They might, start their career out over here, and only a few of those people in that position are typically high level, and maybe they're just too busy enough to not really care what's going on in the show versus something they may have going on in their lives outside of the show. So again, mistakes do tend to occur. So the level of believability here is a little higher than, say, even Squidward's Suicide or any of the, creepypastas based in big production houses where the barrier of entry is a really high level, restriction, and people that work there, even if they are interning, and again, interns are, completely new, they still have to have a level of accountability, and they still need to have a level of skill that is a little higher than, say, working at something smaller. That's where the whole thing's change. So for this show to have the inconsistencies that it did, and even airing a frame of snuff, while it's still out there, is a lot more believable than other sort of environments or scenarios that we have read before. But it makes sense again for this gradual build-up, frame-by-frame advancement, through multiple holy episodes, let's call it that, leading people to do this. Again, it is a dumb concept, but for the time, it does remain smart, and it's done subtly, and it only reveals itself when the time is right, and that's, of course, at the end, where the breakdown sort of occurs. But again, it's not that bad. It's dumb, but that's when you really, really overthink it. I tried looking for any of the stuff in Atlanta, Georgia, but I couldn't find anything and decided not to really question it. I mean, Atlanta is a big city. If this was the case ever, then I'm sure this would make national US headlines without a doubt. And again, it is a creepypasta, so I don't expect it to be real at all. And if it is real, it's very loosely based on true events. But the idea of this psychologically affecting people can make for a cringy thought, again, if you look way too far into it. But if you don't, and you're just reading this to get some spooks off, then it works. But for what it is, I'll tell you that personally I did enjoy it, and I thought it was a nice lost episode or TV creepypasta. Some local channel airing something morbid like this is a nice touch, with a good level of believability. While it does play safe, safe can be good, and at times, creepy. But then again, my opinion is for me and me only, really, and I'd like to ask what your opinion is, because, hey, opinions are the bread and butter of any kind of analysis, and I do want to ask you what you thought of this creepypasta and what would you change to make it better. This has been another episode of Creepypastas, part of Haunted Gaming. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it, and thank you for watching. This is me, Mudahar, and I am out.